next on Eternal Durdles.
Hey, I just want to give a quick shout out to all of our Patreon supporters out there. Thank you to the Durdle Maniacs. If you want to be a Durdle Maniac, go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles and help support the channel. It keeps things going. It keeps things updated. Thanks so much for watching. On with the show.
So here's the thing, Phil. Philip. Philithin.
That's my whole name.
Yeah. We knew, I knew in my head that we weren't going to get any changes until at least early September, late August, right? I said that when I had Max Torsion on, we knew this, but why is this so absolutely disappointing? I've been on Twitter all day long talking to people, retweeting, doing the whole cycle. And did I just make myself miserable here? I just don't get it. I didn't feel so I definitely feel like this card needed a ban well before this, right? Grief needed a ban well before this. And the running sentiment in the community is that it does need a ban. And we get absolutely nothing from WotC aside from Modern Horizons 3 just came out, so let's see. But they also said, wait till Modern Horizons 3 comes out. And then they have a week and a half, 2 weeks after the set's out, they're like, we'll do a ban and restricted announcement. Why not push that back? I don't know, man. This was where's our summer going to go?
One thing that I thought was interesting about the ban announcement was, okay, they're like, Modern Horizons 3 is a shakeup. As much as a cop-out as that feels, it's okay, yeah, there's enough experimentation going on right now that, maybe the format's a little bit different. I mean, we talked about it last episode where I don't think that the MH3 is going to affect the, or really challenge the power outliers, Grief Scaminator being one of them. But yeah. One thing that I'm surprised they didn't talk about was just play experience, because for all intents and purposes, I don't think that anyone would argue that getting rid of grief is a power level problem. It's not it's not doing anything that's wholly oppressive, even though its win rates are extremely consistent, right? That I think is if we look at the power of the deck individually, everything costs effectively 0 mana, or is its own prison piece or individual threat that can win the game on its own. Everything generates cards or causes problems for every other type of deck that you want it. It has access to everything that it needs, and it also has this partial combo, partial maybe not combo, partial very very low to the ground. Mid range is very generous to this thing that has nothing above a 2-drop. And so I think that it's not a matter of is it too powerful, is it not, even if it's posting consistent win rates. But I think the thing that I really would have loved them to see is to show that they're in touch enough with the community and hear from the community enough, because we've seen that they respond to community sentiment with previous bannings. They've done that many a time over, right? Between Dreadheart Arcanist and Ragavan and all these cards that you could theoretically argue aren't necessarily too powerful, right? They're in the Days Wasteland shell, and that's what put them over the top. And Grief is another example of that. But a lot of it is the thing that all these cards have in common are cards that more or less make it so that your play patterns or the way that you can enjoy the game is just destroyed if you lose the die roll in a lot of games at a high enough percentage that people are this just sucks and isn't fun. And so I would have loved them to see them go, we understand that players don't like playing against or with grief, and so we're keeping very close eyes on that and expect to make a move if that sentiment doesn't change after we let Modern Horizons 3 breathe. I think that's what I would have liked to see, just to show that they do have some amount of in touch with the community at large, rather than just looking at numbers on Moto.
Yeah. This episode is brought to you by Tales of Adventure. Go to toamagic.com and use the code DURTLES for 5% off your order. You'll be directly supporting the show, and you'll get the entire order in one package. No more waiting for several packages. That's toamagic.com, code DURTLES for 5% off.
That would have been nice.
Phil, I wore this shirt on purpose. You know what Fix It in Pre means?
I sure
Phil?
do. Bro, I sure do.
Fix It in Pre, right? It means we don't want to have to fix it in post, right? We don't want to have to go, if you're doing a podcast, right? We don't want to have to do all these spit takes and stuff and change things. And, we like to just run a clean, a clean podcast so that there's a very minimal amount of editing. And, you look at cards like Grief, you look at cards like Dreadhorde Arcanist, Oko, all of these things could have been fixed in pre-Phil. And to that end, I mean, they should not have been designed, Like, we're in a state where, like, I don't mind, like, hey, make broken cards, but fix it. Fix the problem immediately. If you have to fix it in post, right? But when you can so obviously fix it in pre, why don't you fix it in pre, right? My other issue, Phil, is, the format is just going to be, this is all we're going to talk about for the next, like, 2 months. Not us, the podcast, but, like, all the legacy, creators, all of legacy period. When you go into a store, it's just going to be griping about Grief. I got beat by Grief. Good way to play Grief. It sucks. It sucks to have to be like, hey, our format is garbage for 2 months because you didn't want to take, like, what is not even a risk, honestly. Like, it's just like a maybe an assertive move to be like, yeah, look, we've looked at data from like a week of Modern Horizons, and not enough changed for us to say that we should keep Grief. Is really how that should, like, the ideal situation should have been. We looked at data, and nothing changed in a way that made us feel like Modern Horizons is going to make enough of an impact to make Grief not an issue. We're just going to ban it.
And that's that notion right there. That's the thing of, like, not an issue. And that's the issue of play experience, right? Now, if they were to go off just the things that they went off of, right, which they also didn't touch on. The last ban announcement, they said that they were keeping eyes on Bowmaster for how much percentage of the format it was seeing play in across archetypes, right? So they were like, we're keeping eyes on Orcish Bowmaster. And to the extent that Bowmaster has continued to be the nuisance that it was, Riskaminator got inbred and started cutting Bowmasters to play more Dothy Voidwalkers. Now, that's inside baseball, right? Like, if you're not following along with the format, to know that, like, where the curve, like, the best deck that puts up the best numbers at the highest clip is doing so at a rate that it can start to inbreed against itself and still post those numbers. And the way to do that is, okay, well, if the only thing that Bowmasters can clip in the mirror is Bowmasters, and then the 8 cantrips, then why not just play the evasive faster clock that can also disrupt the graveyard where they're playing 8 reanimation effects? And so they started cutting Bowmasters to play the Dothy's main. Now, to then, I'd be curious to know if they're looking at the numbers and didn't comment on Bowmaster in a meaningful way as saying, well, Bowmaster's numbers have gone down. That's a good sign. Well, no, it's not. In that, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not a Bowmaster defender here, but the idea that Bowmasters has gone down, it's not because it has. It's just because the only deck that really matters right now is itself, and so they have to prioritize that in their deck building, and then they can still play some number on the board if they're going to run into Beanstalk or whatever and want that tool, or they run into whatever and they want access to the power creep that Bowmasters is. But the fact that they have cut it from their main or deprioritized it in their main in order to battle against the mirror, I mean, once a best deck is just like inbreeding against itself. I mean, that's we've seen that before. That's a Delver metagame. You can
look all the way back to early Type 2 when the thing to do in like Flores's move against what's called Replenish was just like Dark Ritual Stronghold Cabal. Okay, if the best thing to be doing is the thing that everyone's doing, and you put a series of cards in your deck that is better than that thing because it stops it, that doesn't mean that that you've solved the problem, right? Like, the problem isn't solved. Replenish is still bad, but one guy figured out a way to beat in a tournament one time, and the Dothy Voidwalker thing reeks of that, but it's also parasitic because it's in the same deck,
Yeah, I would be curious just to hear them actually speak directly about Grief, because they also when they had the opportunity to ban it in Modern, they chose to ban Fury instead, even though everybody before that ban list was thinking that it's Grief for sure, and then maybe Grief and Fury. But then leaving Grief, there's this. I'm not quite sure what they view grief as beneficial for, since nobody seems to enjoy the play pattern of grief. I haven't heard, like, I don't really hear much of, like, oh yeah, grief is healthy in the way that, like, it's not the same check or tool that's necessary for the format to maintain some amount of balance the way that people come to the defense of Force of Will and Wasteland with, right?
Yeah.
Because even though you could argue even though you could argue that Wasteland is still proactive, because, you could proactively go after your opponent's mana base, they have to have some amount of disrespect for Wasteland to begin with. But you can't prepare for grief
You
outside
can't just
of
keep a 7-lander and say,
we've talked
you can't get me.
we have talked about the way that you have to prepare against grief, which is this: that your deck has to be so exorbitantly redundant that if you get forcibly mulliganed to 5 with pressure, that your deck can still operate on effectively low resources, which means that not only does that, like, this Days Wasteland compress the curve, but now that further compresses the curve, because it means that whatever cards you take, they're going to disrupt whatever that is. And then backed by the Days Wasteland package means that you have to compress even further. But not only do you have to compress further, in order to have the tools to actually do anything that game, your cards all have to do the same thing, because if they can pick something apart, then you're kind of fucked, right? So the only way to really get through getting forcibly mulliganed on the play is to just have all of your cards all do the same thing. And is that going to be all that interesting? Like, is that really, it's just like, at a certain point, I think that there's a conversation to be had. And I think this would be interesting to talk about other people in the community with too, because we sort of hit these positions a lot with, like, these power outlier cards that are pushed by the shells that are effectively untouchable in the format. It's like, if we can never touch Days, if we can never touch Wasteland, if we can never touch, what are otherwise considered pillars of the format that are part of its identity, if those are stuck forever and they're going to push these, like, really problematic outliers, I'm curious how other people would find their ways to desensitize themselves to that. That way they don't get frustrated for these kinds of episodes. I remember for a while I did that with Ragavan. When Ragavan was still in the format, if somebody just had Ragavan plus Days, I was like, okay, like, I can't not act. I can't let you hit me because the game will end. So I have to throw a removal spell at it. So if you have the Days, well, that's that you just opened some nut, and I didn't have the correct follow-up for the nut, in which case, it's more or less the same, right? If you have Ragavan plus Days and I have removal spell and Force
It's
of Will,
like having the turn 1 with the Necro Dominance deck. You're like, all right.
We'll both just simplify down because the game requires it, otherwise it functionally ends. So, but, like, at a certain point when that happened, I was just like, okay, this is the position that the format is in, where I don't have the option to not fire this off, right? So I got to fire it off. So now when I get grief scammed, I always just assume that if I get griefed, that the reanimate is coming. And so I'm just like, okay, I'm going to be stripped down to, like, before the first grief resolves, I'm thinking, what are the 5 cards I'm going to be left with if I kept a 7, right? Yeah. So I'm already jumping ahead, and that sort of helps me desensitize to when they have the follow-up reanimate, and it's like, oh, fuck, man, like, every time, always, blah, 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 blah. Like, to get through that, like, mental hurdle, I just, like, sort of jump the gap to help me just feel as though, okay, it's not a problem, this is just, like, how it goes, and this is how we will functionally play this game. And even though that sucks, it does help me, like, sort of maintain being able to play through that game, even if it becomes even if it ultimately is a non-game at the end of the day. It sort of helps me, like, move on, because I remember for a while I was checked out. We had a couple of episodes. You remember that? I was like pretty checked out.
I do.
I was like, this is just not interesting. I'm not here for this. I'm not into it. And then at a certain point, I was like, man, I really miss being able to have that sort of, like, passion and desire and interest for, like, the puzzle that, like, I so enjoy. And so I was like, what is the hurdle that's preventing me from being able to do that? And a lot of it just became the things that otherwise make it so that it's impossible to do that. And part of that, to an extent, is the play patterns of Grief Scam. But then also, for my personal take, was also, like, something like Initiative. And so now whenever that stuff happens, I sort of just, like, skip that beat and just go, okay, that's it. I'll just scoop. We'll go to the next game, and I won't think about that one anymore. And that has, like, helped in a meaningful way. And now anytime you see an Initiative creature hit the table against me, I just auto scoop. I'm just, like, not interested in, like, having that weigh on me mentally when I'm trying to, like, figure out what the next move to play the game or the next match or whatever it may be. And I think about it now in the same way with Grief Scam. Whenever I get scammed, I'm just like, okay, I'm getting scammed. On to the next thing, right? And just, like, help me jump. I wonder if other people have different ways that they get around that sort of barrier, because I think a lot of this I don't know if we talk about mindset all that often, but I think a lot of it is mindset, right? Like we get into these spots where these cards could just go. They could just go. It's like nobody's going to miss them if they go. But like in the interim, until they go, if they go, that we have to like just like embrace the problem until it goes away, because we don't have the other option outside of just taking a break, which I think is totally reasonable. It's totally reasonable. But I'd be curious if anybody else wants to comment on this video. We always read all the comments, and I would actually be really interested to see what other people do to like get over these mental barriers that we do, because Zach came into this episode hot, and I'll tell you, before, like when we were like, okay, we're going to record this today, I was hot earlier when they didn't actually show anything on the ban list. But we had enough time between the ban list announcement and us recording the episode for me to like gather my thoughts on like, how did we get here? How did we miss this thing? And it's like, is MH3 really just the excuse? So I've gotten to this sort of headspace that is sort of, a bit relieving. It's like it sort of relieves that that desire to rage, because don't get me wrong, I got it. I got the desire to rage. But it is helpful to like be in the rage space for a moment and then clear your thoughts. And I'd be curious to hear what everybody else does, if they do anything.
Eternal Durdles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy, and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
Phil, I had that interview with Blake at PhillyCon, MC Philly, and we addressed. It's a 6-minute video, so we'll pop it up somewhere, and you can watch. It's the last question in the 6-minute video, and we talked about a legacy community committee, right? Like that it is based on people in the community that are known legacy players that care about the format, that can at least inform WotC on times when a situation like this would be dire. It would screw up the format for a couple months or something like that. And I think my takeaway from that initially was that they said, and I said this on Twitter today, my memory of it was that Blake said, Pauper and EDH are fan-made formats, and we're never going to do a Legacy one because Legacy was made by WotC, and we're not, it's just not how it's going to happen. But he did say, he said, never say never. And he said that the other thing that he said that was, and this wasn't even informed from, the takeaway we always have where like we say, rage content is something that they actually pay attention to, which is often why I make this kind of content, because I want them to know that like we're not happy about this. Like today, because I'm posting this tomorrow. We did this on Monday. It will go up early Tuesday. Today there will be a weekly MTG. Get in the comments. Get in the comments. Like, do not like. I'm not saying like start crap with them. But like, let them know that you're unhappy about the way that they've done this. If you're unhappy, if you're not, you're probably a sociopath. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
But the thing that I took away from that is that he said that one of the things that their play design team does before they make ban announcements is they do talk to the people in the community. They go out there and talk to the people in the community and get a sentiment, right? I don't think they did that this particular time. I think they were just like, we can throw a dart at the wall on this one and say, hey, no big deal. We just put out a new set. Easy pass on this one. Because I feel like reading the entire thing, it felt like they said that about every format. They were like, yeah, easy pass. Oh, we know this is a problem, but easy pass because the new format. They didn't say that about Pioneer, obviously. They wrote more about Pioneer because there's none of these cards can go into Pioneer. But every single one of these things was like, well, Modern Horizons just came out, so and fine, whatever. But I say all that to say this: tomorrow, today, 1:00 or whenever they have the weekly MTG, and I'll have a link below. So I'll put a link to the website below for that. Go in there and say, look, Legacy needs a community committee. We need to have that. This format needs it. You guys aren't paying enough attention to the community, and it means so much to us, and is such a small lift for you to give up this agency over this format that you don't obviously care that much about, or you would be putting out Legacy Masters or Legacy, or you would care about the reserve list, So how about you just give it to the people who actually do care about it, And you don't take every piece of advice that the Pauper committee throws down. I feel like they don't have like full control over the ban list. We don't need knee-jerk reactions in Legacy, but we do need reactions after a long time. And this has been a long time coming that this card needed to be banned. Specifically, Grief needed to be banned. And passing the buck on before Modern Horizons comes out and then passing the buck right after Modern Horizons comes out shows me that you're out of touch in some capacity. And, this is a great opportunity for us as Legacy players to say, hey, just can we take it back? Can we have it for ourselves? Because, there are plenty of people who are TOs out there that are running tournaments this summer that are like, great, now, no one's going to want to come. It's just scam city. So, who wants to pay $100 to come out to this hotel, do the whole weekend, it's good. It includes, people watching these videos and stuff. Whenever there is a complete disdain for the format, numbers for us go down. I know that. I'm sure, you can talk to your Bryant Cooks and your Bosch and Rolls. Everything gets worse for a couple of months. Everyone's upset. The salt is real, and it just stinks. So how about just give us a community committee? That's all I'm saying.
You've made me think of a maybe a happy medium, which it's if they don't think that Legacy is worth having a panel because they feel like they have a grasp on it. I think a way that they could sort of meet in the middle is to at least have whoever their people that they would at least reach out to for a sense of where the community's at, even if it's not a full-on panel of people that they actually will discuss things with, but at least before an announcement, if they already know what they're going to do, to at least say or reach out to whoever would represent Legacy to say, hey team, what are the things that people really, really need to hear us talk about?
Yeah.
Even if they're not giving any influence as to what their decisions are on those things, at least it'll help translate what we want to hear from them to know that they at least have thought about the things that we want them to think about. So even if they have no intention of banning Grief, because they're like, we're not going to touch anything, we want MH3 to have enough breathing room to shake things up, and then we'll see from there. If that's let's say it's earnest in not passing the buck. Let's assume that position, right?
Sure.
If that's in earnest, at least then check in and be like, hey team, we can't tell you what we're going to do for the ban announcement, but just in case we haven't talked about anything, is there anything that the community does want us to talk about or refer to or give some insight or transparency about?
Yes.
And at least then we can say, you got to talk, if you're not banning Grief, you got to talk about why not specifically. Yeah. You got to follow up on what you were saying about with Bowmaster. You got to talk about XYZ on different pieces. You got to talk about where your thoughts are on Urza Saga being around and knowing that every single 1-mana artifact is just going to be tutorable off of this, Grave Titan that costs no mana. You at least talk about those things and give us a sense of where your head is at regarding its power level with relationship to the format and the game experience. That way we know that you're at least on the same page or know where the community at whole is at, because the worst that can happen from transparency is just transparency. That's it. You don't actually have to act on any of it. You can at least just let us know that we were not trying to fantasy book what's going on and thinking that we get to these conclusions where it's oh, you must not care. But if you do, then that's at least a way to extend the olive branch. That way you are transparent enough that we can understand. And I think that would be a happy medium. They don't have to give up their agency, but they can at least talk to us.
Here's the other thing, Phil, is had I known 4 months ago that they weren't going to ban Grief 2 months ago, and then they weren't going to ban Grief today, I'd have bought 4 Griefs, back then, and I'd be playing it, I would have spent money, I would have been like, okay, well, if this is the best thing to do, and I've got 6 months to do it, I guess I'll do that, But when we live in this limbo world where we don't know when a ban is going to come, specifically when a ban is going to come, not when the ban announcement is, right? We just we're all holding our breath, waiting for the thing to happen, and we can't make purchases based on that. I don't think that's something that's spoken about enough. Is it like, would I be a villain for a couple of months? Yeah, but like play the best deck, obviously, right? Like, sure. And if it gets banned, if it had gotten banned 2 months ago and I had just bought them, I'd have been upset. If I'd have bought them after the last ban, I would have been like, okay, today it gets banned. Like I knew what I was doing, right?
Mhm.
Like I was sure that like I spent that $60 on the 4 griefs, and I knew that like I had a limited amount of time with them, right? Now I'm like, oh great, well like they're definitely like in my head, I'm like they're definitely going to ban this. I don't even want to spend time trying to play this card, right? I don't want to buy it, right? And I wouldn't at this point. Same thing with Bowmasters. I was telling you before, I own 2 Bowmasters. I only own 2, and I'm messing around with numbers right now to try and make that work in the decks that I'm playing, because I don't think Bowmasters is actually as good as it has been lately. I think you're going to catch people with it still. The fact that it exists in the format is enough to dissuade people from playing like they used to play. So you're not going to catch as many people.
That influence is also in deck building, right? So
yeah.
Naturally, like if Bowmaster's numbers go down, it's not necessarily a reflection of it not being as powerful as it is. It might be a reflection of, this is an oppressive force that requires certain deck building to make it so that it isn't as effective, right? Which is just format sweeping. That's format overhauling. Yeah. So like even if the numbers don't reflect it, if every deck has to build itself with it in mind, that's the same way that you have to build every single deck that you play with Days and Wasteland in mind, right? It is a format overhauling card, even if it doesn't necessarily show up at the numbers that would represent a card of that kind of power level, Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we've we've put enough air into the room about this. What do you think? Again, please go tomorrow. I'm going to put that link below to whatever their Twitch channel or their YouTube channel is that they do that. If you're watching this video, just be ready. Get in there. Go in the comments and let them know that you're a Legacy player and you're unhappy with no changes. You're unhappy with the amount of information that we've been given on the bans. Let them know. Again, respectfully, but make your voice heard, because I think that they don't think that enough people play Legacy that they have to care that much. Like one more random thing I need to say. I would have, if I was involved in that in any way, shape, or form, you would have gotten 4 sentences from me. You'd have gotten a lot of information. I think that if they would take the time, as like they're affecting so many people, write 20 sentences about what's going on. That's the least you can do. If you're going to affect a format in any way, shape, or form, and no change is a change, or no changes at least affecting the format, you need to write out why. I want a dissertation, and I don't think that's too much to ask. I think that everyone would appreciate a little bit more transparency. So with that said, Phil, I want to remind everybody that they can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/eternaldurdles. Please like, subscribe, and if you can, share this. You probably came to it via Twitter. Hit the retweet button or whatever. And yeah, we'll have another episode out a little later this week, but had to do this one real fast. So thanks everybody for watching, and we'll catch you next time.
Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help sustain the Legacy content ecosystem. Just subscribe to this channel goes a long way to reminding YouTube that people love and support this format. Now, if you really want to go the extra mile, you should think about supporting us through Patreon. Both the links for subscription and Patreon are right here. And if you're listening on an audio format, you can go to patreon.com/eternaldurdles. Thanks so much for watching.